Welcome to the Prime Time Podcast, everyone, hosted here on the MVG Nick YouTube channel. My name is Nick, and today we have another fantastic episode of the podcast here. This is episode number 9, as you can see, of the show that talks about all things in the world of TV, news, reviews, commentaries, and more. And today we are joined by a couple of very special guests here that are no stranger to the podcast or to the channel here. Joining me via Zoom for their second episode, please welcome back my good buddy Mike and my brother Matt. How are you folks doing this evening here?
Good.
Good.
Yeah, everyone's doing well tonight. Yeah, nice fall evening for us to gather here and to talk all about TV here. For anyone watching this or listening that might not know who you are here on YouTube, if you want to take a minute, introduce yourself, talk about what you guys do here on your channels as well. Mike, why don't you go first here?
My channel name is Mike's Talks and Thoughts. I do a lot of tier lists. That's like my main thing. Characters tier lists. I also do, reviews on some of the latest stuff that's coming out or rankings. So if you like, reviews, rankings, tier lists, my channel's got all of that.
All right, fantastic. And Matt, why don't you go ahead?
I'm Matthew. I run the channel Cartoon Lover Productions. I haven't done that much in a while, but I try to post videos about cartoons and TV and stuff. And I'm slowly working on movie reviews as well. So look out for that in the future. Yeah, Cartoon Lover Productions.
Awesome. Yeah, both of these guys' channels will be linked in the description, of course. Both definitely bigger than mine at this point, I would say, but well deserved. Definitely putting out some great content. So, with that in mind, though, what are we going to be talking about for today's podcast here? Well, it actually does represent a couple videos that we have made on our channels in the past here. All three of us, of course, love to talk about TV, and one of the most interesting topics, at least in my opinion, when it comes to TV related discussion, is that of some of your most polarizing, unpopular, and controversial TV hot takes here. And the three of us all have videos on this exact subject here that we've done in the past. But for today's podcast, we are going to be looking at some of the most controversial, unpopular opinions that many people would have in regards to various TV topics here. Throughout the slideshow, we're going to be presenting some of them here and giving our thoughts on them. And for each one, we also have a collection of screenshots from all over the web, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Reddit, wherever it is, kind of laying out the different sides of the argument and seeing what people think about these different hot takes here. And throughout, like I said, we'll give our takes on them as well. Some of these pulled from those social media platforms, some of them pulled from our videos, some of them just interesting for discussion type of topics there. So, with that in mind, anything else that you guys would like to add before we get started here?
Nope.
No, you're good. All right, we're just antsy to get into it. So, with that in mind, let's take a look at our first topic of the evening here. This one, in regards to its overall sort of stature within the TV sphere, is one of the biggest when it comes to TV sitcoms here. Two of the most popular that often get compared to one another in several different ways and that are very similar but also very different from one another. But regardless of what side you're on, I think it's safe to say that you will definitely have people agree with you and disagree with you based on which of these two shows you prefer. And that is between How I Met Your Mother and Friends here to start off our podcast here. So as you can see here, the collection of screenshots we have a few Twitter mentions here, some of them in favor of How I Met Your Mother, some of them in favor of Friends. A screenshot from my video where, of course, as you can imagine, I am team How I Met Your Mother all the way on this one. And then this article from BuzzFeed here, which I thought was pretty interesting, of 27 TV shows, quote unquote, great TV shows that are actually overrated in most people's opinions. And Friends and Yum Yum both represented on this list here. Now, Mike, I know that you are a big fan of both of these, so why don't you lead off this discussion? What side do you fall when it comes to this hot take here?
All right, yeah. So of us three, I'm definitely the biggest fan of both shows. I would say I adore How I Met Your Mother and Friends. They are both amazing shows to me. But if you have seen any of my videos or heard me talk about it on Nick's channel, I am Team How I Met Your Mother. I absolutely love that series. One thing that I've just really noticed about the debate with How I Met Your Mother versus Friends is usually people who were born and grew up in the 90s or prefer Friends, while the newer age of the 2000s prefer How I Met Your Mother, which I can definitely see. The shows are very similar, but personally, I like How I Met Your Mother more. I like the story a little bit more, and I think it's a little bit funnier show. So I'm gonna go with How I Met Your Mother.
All right, very good. Matt, what about you here? Where do you fall with this debate?
Yeah, so for me, I'm also going to go with How I Met Your Mother on this one, mainly because I really have not seen that much from Friends, if I'm being honest. Like, I don't think I've seen a single full episode, believe it or not, which might be kind of crazy to hear some
You
people,
might have to
some
change
people
that.
out there might, they might not believe that, but I've never seen Friends. I've seen a few clips, but that's about it. But, I saw How I Met Your Mother a long time ago, and I absolutely love the show. Just so many classic characters, so many classic episodes, and overall, I've just seen more of it. And like Michael said, it's definitely one that 2000s people like me and Nick grew up with more than Friends was more 90s, and just not our generation. So for me, I'm definitely gonna say How I Met Your Mother on this one.
All right, and I would definitely agree with you guys here. Of course, if you are familiar with my content in any way, probably know that How I Met Your Mother is my all-time favorite TV show. Just so many different elements to the show, I think, coming together, making it as great as it is, based on the story, the characters, the writing, directing, all of the different elements. Definitely one of the best in my opinion there. That being said, though, I do think there are some individual aspects of Friends that are stronger than How I Met Your Mother. I think one of the most controversial aspects of Him Yim is the finale, of course. I think that is definitely one of the individual moments where Friends really did outshine How I Met Your Mother in that regard. Definitely a much more well received and much more positive reception to its finale in that respect. But overall, I would definitely agree with you guys and say How I Met Your Mother is the stronger of the two shows here. Before we move on to our next topic, though, I do want to get your guys' thoughts on this article. Like I said, Mike, why don't we start with you? Do you understand why people, even if you are a big fan of these shows, like you mentioned, would argue that either one of these is overrated to some degree?
Definitely because when I was first, getting really big into TV and looking at a lot of lists had Friends in the top three sitcoms and shows of all time. Which, in my opinion, even though I'm a huge fan of the show, I just think that's a way too high. And of course, How I Met Your Mother too. That's one I definitely don't see as much because of the finale, of course. It was always really high up, but people always knock it down a few spots because of that finale. But still, I see it a lot more in Friends being overrated or being talked about, as the best comedy or sitcom of all time, which I can definitely say, in my opinion, is a little bit overrated.
All right, fair enough. Matt, what about you here? Any thoughts on these two being quote unquote overrated by any means?
Friends is overrated for sure. Like that is like genuinely the most overrated, most talked about sitcom ever, and it just really isn't that good from what I've seen. It's just not very funny, and like I said, How I Met Your Mother was kind of nostalgic for me a little bit because me and Nick watched it, a year ago, and it was just super funny, super touching at times, and just a much better show. So it's a little bit nostalgic for me because I really haven't seen it in years, but at the time it was a great show. But I don't think How I Met Your Mother is that overrated, but Friends is for sure. Like that is like the most talked about show ever. It feels like no one will just shut up about Friends. Like everyone knows like the references to it, all the relationships in it, and everything, and like everything that happens from top to bottom. Like even 20 years later after it's ended, it's like people are still talking about it. So definitely overrated.
I think that speaks to how much of an impact it had, how relatable it was to some degree, that even after all this time, people are still putting it on lists as high as they are. But yeah, I would definitely agree with you guys too. I do think, even as a hardcore, fan of Him Yum, that there are definitely some aspects to it that get a little too much attention at times. And Friends, for sure, I definitely agree with Matt. I think it is a pretty overhyped series as well. There, if you guys remember my top 100 TV shows, it came in at number two, only behind Seinfeld as the greatest ranked show. So definitely a little bit high in my opinion there as well. There, so pretty much universally agreed upon between the three of us here for this first topic, how we all line up with this debate. But our next one here might be slightly different, and that is another comparison between two shows that are very similar but very different than How I Met Your Mother and Friends, of course. These two in the animation genre both debuted on Cartoon Network about 10 years ago now and are still being talked about all this time later. It is Regular Show and Adventure Time here. This is going to be a good debate. Might definitely stir some stuff up in the comments here. Whoops. As we scroll back. All right, it's a little sensitive there. As you can see again, we have a bunch of different opinions from all over the web here. We have a couple Twitter polls. One goes to Regular Show, one goes to Adventure Time. A couple YouTube clips and some of the just brief sort of captions that they talk about there. We have a screenshot from Mike's video. Actually, you talked about this one in your hot takes video here. Some polls on Reddit and some arguments on Reddit that give it to Adventure Time here. So lots of different opinions with this one in particular. But Matt, I know you are the cartoon lover of this group, as your name would imply. So why don't you go first here? Which show do you prefer of these two?
Well, for one, just saying straight out, this Aiden guy on Twitter is like flat out wrong with most of these opinions because Teen Titans Go, Powerpuff Girls 2016, and Ben 10 2017 are not good shows, but whatever, that's a whole other story. But for me, yeah, Regular Show is obviously way better. At the time, I grew up with both of these shows. I watched Regular Show so much. They used to be one of my all-time favorite shows, and at the time, Adventure Time was super popular as well. Like, people say in the 80s and 90s, shows like G.I. Joe and like the Ninja Turtles and stuff, those are like huge. That was like my generation's version of it. And like everyone was talking about Adventure Time all the time and Regular Show as well. But Adventure Time was definitely bigger. Everyone knew the story and everything, all the characters and stuff. And I just never really got the hype. And even now, I still don't really get the hype. I think it's enjoyable, but just, not as good as people say. But Regular Show, 10 years later is still super funny. It's still probably even funnier now than it was back in the day with some of its more adult humor and stuff. Definitely going Regular Show on this one.
All right, very well said there. Mike, why don't you jump in? Which side are you on for this one?
I'm definitely on the side of Regular Show. Of course, these both came up right at the same time, and were kind of the reason Cartoon Network got saved, as people would say. Came out and really bolstered the network up to higher standards. And they're always going to be compared with each other because they both started and ended right around the same time. But for me, I've always been more of a Regular Show. Even when I was growing up watching it, I grew up more with Regular Show, and just I gravitated more to that show a lot more than Adventure Time. It seems like I know there's a lot of big Adventure Time defenders out there, but for me, I would have to say Regular Show gets my vote here of the two cartoon series.
All right. And once again, I am in agreement with both of these gentlemen. Regular Show for me, like Matt said, super nostalgic. Growing up, we watched it all the time together. Adventure Time wasn't really much my cup of tea. It was definitely more about the mythology and there was a bigger lore to it, whereas Regular Show was more humorous and it was more about the comedy. But one thing that I was going to point out about these two that I personally have noticed over the years as these two shows their legacy has grown over time is that the fan bases for these two are pretty different from one another. I feel like Regular Show, even though both of these have targeted a specific demographic of kids and teenagers, I think Regular Show does a much better job at actually getting that sort of demographic to enjoy it. Whereas Adventure Time, it seems like the fan
Yeah.
base is more adults than anything else nowadays because it seems like the sort of mythology and the lore and the story is more reminiscent of some bigger dramas and more sort of serialized series that adults would find more enjoyable than like a little, kids comedy cartoon series like Regular Show is. So I just thought that was interesting. And there's a couple other Cartoon Network shows that you could apply that to as well, such as Steven's of adult fan base. So,
Oh my god,
but you don't like Steven Universe, Matt?
that's a show that like no one will shut up about.
Yeah.
I like it. I think it's good, but again, wasn't really big on it when I was younger. But whatever.
But maybe you will grow into that because it seems like that's more of an adult type of show.
I guess. I don't
which is
know.
kind of interesting. But yes, once again, the three of us in agreement here for Regular Show over Adventure Time. We are going to stick with the cartoon conversation for our next one here, talking about arguably the greatest animated show to ever be broadcasted on TV here from Nickelodeon back in the late 90s and early 2000s. And this one is probably the most controversial that we have talked about yet in the podcast here, because this is definitely a very, very discussed topic within the fan base. And there's a lot of different options to go for. What years constitute as SpongeBob's golden era here is our next topic here. As we look at the different screenshots we have here, you can see on these forums, one that I really wanted to point out here, you have a bunch of different hardcore fans kind of ranking where each season goes or what era goes. We also have this poll from YouTube here. What is the best early SpongeBob season? Another one from Michael's video that he talked about in his hot takes video. We have a couple Twitter mentions saying that season 2 in particular is a very, very positively reviewed series of the show. So this is another one that you can have a ton of different opinions on, and someone will agree and someone will definitely disagree with you. If you guys don't mind, I would like to go first on this one, because for me, I think I have the most traditional sort of opinion on this, which is that seasons 1 through 3, simply put, are the best, and nothing else from SpongeBob can touch those. I think that the writing was very strong back in the day. I think the animation was really strong back in the day, comparable to where it would go in the future. A lot of the humor in it came from very subtle references and almost adult jokes at times, whereas the later seasons would pretty much solely focus on gross out and physical comedy, which I think gets stale after a while. It was much more rewatchable back in the day because of the subtlety in the writing, like I said, and even more so than any of that, Steven Hillenburg's involvement. Of course, many people in the fandom know that after season 3 and after the movie, Hillenburg walked away. He wanted to pursue other projects, and I think that is when the show definitely took a creative hit. It was basically the amalgamation of a lot of different writers trying to kind of Frankenstein something together that felt like the early seasons, but just weren't able to do it without his involvement. So that's kind of my argument for why seasons 1 through 3 in particular definitely are the standouts there. But I know you guys definitely would have something else to say. Let's jump to Mike here. If he wants to expand on what he talked about in his hot takes video, go ahead. Mike, take it away here.
Yeah, so I mentioned that I think that season 4 and 5 do belong in the golden years. While I do agree with Nick in the fact that seasons out of the 5 seasons, if I were ranking the 5 seasons, the first 3 would be the top 3. Like someone mentioned in this post that we made here, season 2 of SpongeBob is the best season. I said that in my favorite TV seasons ranking that season 2 is my favorite season. I absolutely love it. I think it's got the best episodes. But I also really love a lot of classics from 4 and 5 as well. I really think after season 5 is just really bad and not even worth watching after that point. Like season 6 onwards is all horrible. It's just not as it was. Shockingly, I do remember some stuff from season 4 and 5 when I was growing up. That was definitely towards the later end, though, of my adolescence, watching SpongeBob. But I definitely think that 4 and 5 don't get enough credit that they deserve, and those 5 years should belong together, and then everything else, and you can just scrap it from SpongeBob.
So before Matt gives his opinion, so Mike, you disagree with when these couple people say that season 9, the second half of 9 onward, say is the second golden age of it, but you completely disagree with that.
Yeah, I
100%.
know people have been saying that. I know I've heard that from Matt. That a lot of people say like the really new stuff is starting to come back, but I just can't see it, man. Just it's changed so much, and I feel like those episodes just they never connect nowadays because all the ones that we really like are stuff that we just seen so many times growing up. They just become so nostalgic, and all these newer ones they just don't have that same feel that you had when you were watching them growing up.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. The rewatchability, like I said, of those older episodes are definitely lost, and nowadays. But Matt, why don't you round us out here? You might have the most interesting opinion of all of us here, so I'm curious
Yeah.
to know.
All right. So for me, I've always said that season 5 is the best season of SpongeBob. Like, just period. Like, I definitely think that the first 3 seasons are awesome, and those are the golden age to answer this actual question. But I think 4 and 5 are definitely up there. I don't think that, like, in my opinion, I think they are, but just like I know that a lot of people would kind of say it's like maybe the mid kind of like golden age, and then it's not really like I would agree that that's not part of the official golden age, but like this guy says, it's like the golden age or first 3 seasons, and then sleeping quality age is like 4 and 5. But I think that 4 and 5 are still great seasons, and I think that season 5 is still my favorite. But then as it went on, definitely, like Michael said, season 6 and beyond, it just got really bad. And like I said, a lot of people really like season 9 and beyond. I just do not see it because, like you guys were saying, the rewatchability of those episodes just not very good. Because I bought season 9 on DVD and I binged every episode, and like I don't remember any of them. So yeah, season 9 is horrible. I haven't seen anything else since then, and yeah, just not good. But 4 and 5 are in the golden age for sure.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but season 9 onward, they start introducing a lot of new characters, correct? Like a lot of additional kind of side characters that don't really play into the series as much as the older ones did. But
I guess I don't know.
okay, I could be
I
wrong on
don't
that,
really
but
remember.
yeah, but that's just one of the things. So again, kind of all in unity there, but yeah, I do like seasons 4 and 5, but I just don't think they hold up to the earlier ones to be considered part of the golden age proper there. But that's just me. All right,
Yeah.
moving on to our fourth discussion here. We're going to stick with the Nickelodeon type of shows for a minute here, but we are transitioning to a live action for this one. One creator in particular that definitely had a big impact on Nickelodeon back in the 2000s and early 2010s here. Kind of nowadays known a little bit more infamously than positively, but all of that kind of weird foot fetish shit aside, we're putting that to the side here, and we're just talking about the quality of the shows. The man, the myth, the legend here, Daniel Schneider himself. What was his best show from back in the day here? This is another one where, depending on where you look, depending on who you talk to, you will get a wide variety of
Oh,
opinions here. We have a couple. Oops, sorry about that. Whoops, a little
oh wow.
preview for the later.
Medical shows do not suck.
Well, we'll talk about that in
Oh,
a little bit
spoiler,
later there.
whatever.
But you can see here off to the left, we have a couple instances where Drake and Josh went out this Twitter poll and on the top 10s, but then right next to it here on Reddit, we have Drake and Josh has to be the most overrated TV show ever, which is a strong argument, but we'll talk about that in a sec. We have some rankings here in the middle, top 5, or a ranking from best to worst. A couple instances where What I Like About You on the WB ended up ranking out pretty high. Watch Mojo and Rotten Tomatoes there. And then from my video, iCarly, I would argue, and from this TikTok here, Victorious, saying that it was stronger than iCarly. So, like I said, lots of different variants here. Mike, why don't you start us here? Because I know you were a big on Dan Schneider, of course, back in the day, but you were definitely one that watched it like all the way through the 2000s. So you saw a ton of these shows. What is your favorite here?
Yeah, so I grew up on all of these Dan Schneider shows. These were like my bread and butter back in the day. This and of course some of the shows on the Disney Channel I watched all the time. I was always a live action guy over cartoons, even though I do love cartoons. I was always more live action. And for me, like the big three that I always watched, of course, was Drake and Josh, iCarly, and Zoe 101. Of course, all Dan Schneider shows, and they all came out around the same time, mid 2000s shows. But the one that definitely had the biggest impact for me was Drake and Josh. I know that a lot of people also include Victorious in there. Victorious was a little bit after my time. I saw the first season of it, but after that, I didn't really see much of it. It was kind of I was kind of fading out from the Nickelodeon phase around that time, early 2010s. So I can't really say much on Victorious, but Drake and Josh for me, just such a great show. I know Drake and Josh were just such a great comedic duo, and of course they got their start on the Amanda Show, I believe. So
Hmm.
uh, that was one that I remember seeing too when I was really young, growing up, and just a lot of great memories. Definitely the one with the most quotable or memorable episodes to me that I've seen the most came from Drake and Josh. And I love the movies that came along with it. Of course, Drake and Josh Go Hollywood and Merry Christmas, Drake and Josh. Two of my favorite TV movies ever. So for me, I got to pick Drake and Josh of the Dan Schneider shows.
All right, very well said there. Matt, what about you here? You were a little bit later. You kind of missed out on some of those early 2000s ones, but for you, what would you
Yeah.
say your favorite is?
Well, for me to kind of talk about the early ones, admittedly, I've never watched Zoe 101, so I have like zero opinion on that, just straight up. And like the Amanda Show, all that, I've seen a couple clips and sketches and stuff, and I think they're pretty funny. But for me, the big three for me were Drake and Josh, iCarly, Victorious. Those were just amazing shows back in the day. I was always watching those on when they played them and stuff. But for me, this is kind of tough because you know, just watched them so much. I think recently though, I would probably say my favorite is Drake and Josh as well. Just because the humor is still super funny. It's still like throughout the whole series, it's just such an incredible show, and it never really slips in quality. Whereas iCarly got a little bit kind of dumb in the last couple seasons when they got really old, and like Gibby was super old, and his brother even was like getting kind of old for the show.
Yeah.
Just
Fair enough,
wasn't
fair
very
enough.
good.
If I could jump back in here, what Matt was saying
Yeah,
about Drake and Josh, I actually sent them a clip in our group chat yesterday. It was Craig and Eric kind of get into a fight. It's still hilarious to this day. Um,
We got that Drake and
yeah,
Josh gang over there. I like it. For
yeah.
me personally, as you can tell again
Wait, I wasn't
from,
done.
oh, go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
Yeah. So anyway, so I was saying, yeah, iCarly got kind of bad, and then Victorious definitely fell from grace because the first season is probably the best season of any of these shows, but then the rest of them are just like almost unwatchable. They like slightly get worse as they go on, but the first season's awesome. But for me, I'm gonna definitely go with Drake and Josh on this one. Plus, you got not one but two amazing movies, like Mike said. Drake and Josh Go to Hollywood, Merry Christmas, Drake and Josh, very nostalgic movie. So I'm going Drake and Josh on this one.
All right, very well said there. For me, I'll do mine kind of quick here. iCarly definitely was my favorite of these. I definitely watched a ton of Drake and Josh, of course, in reruns all the time. There are some of my all-time favorite sitcom episodes definitely come from Drake and Josh there. But for me, the reason why iCarly is so high for me was simply because of the fact that when those new episodes aired, they were an event. Those were some of those episodes
Yeah,
and some of those TV moments that like you had to be there for it. You couldn't watch those after the fact. And I don't think there ever was another show before or after that has had that sort of pull on me that I had to like be there when those episodes dropped. Of course, when we were growing up, that was kind of the middle school, high school age when we were watching iCarly, and like you would just remember people talking about it all the time immediately afterwards and giving their thoughts on it too. And it was really one of the first shows that I remember being invested in some of the ongoing storylines as well. That was pretty unique for a teen sitcom at the time compared to any other of the Dan Schneider shows. I think iCarly was really one of the first to do some really intense kind of relationship moments on the show and do some serialized storylines that went through the multiple seasons there, and that was a really nice addition to it, as well as all the comedy, of course. Um, and then for one last thing with this particular debate that I wanted to ask you is when me and Mike did our videos on our favorite and least favorite characters, we did a format where it was our favorite, least favorite, overrated, and underrated for certain shows. And I'm really curious to know how you guys would apply this format if you had to pick one for each of a Dan Schneider show here. What would you guys say for that? Mike, you can go first if you want.
So yeah, just out of any of the shows,
Yeah.
favorite character.
No,
Um,
like the show that you would pick as your favorite of his, least favorite, and then over under.
okay, yeah. So my favorite is definitely going to be Drake and Josh. Um, if we're counting the Amanda Show and all that, I would say the Amanda Show is probably then my least favorite. But if we're just counting, the big four, Victorious would be my least. Um, and then I would say for underrated, I'm definitely going to go Zoe 101. I definitely think that show is very overlooked and no one really talks about it. It's really left behind.
Mm.
And then overrated, I don't want to say it, but of all the ones, I think iCarly, but I really don't think it's overrated. That one's a really hard one to pick.
That's
because
fair.
I really don't feel like any of his shows are really overrated.
All right. Matt, what would
Yeah.
you say for each of those categories?
So for me, favorite, like I said, Drake and Josh. Most under, or I guess we'll do a most hated. I would say Sam and Cat, even though we never really talked about it.
Sam and Cat.
Or
I
Henry
agree with
Danger,
that one.
actually, because Henry Danger is pretty unwatchable. And then most underrated, probably Victorious. Most overrated, Zoe 101, I guess, even though I've never really seen it.
All right. For me, my favorite's iCarly. My least favorite, I'm gonna go with Henry Danger as well. Formerly, it
Henry
was Zoe
Danger.
101, but dude, I tried to watch the pilot
forgot
of
about
Henry
that.
Danger. I couldn't make it past 5 minutes. That shit
Yeah.
is
That show-
horrible,
dude,
dude.
I
Like
It's
at
like-
I did
least
the
Sam and
same
Cat.
thing,
the
literally.
kids that are growing up with this nowadays, it's horrible.
Yeah, like at least Sam and Cat, you know Jeanette McCurdy and Ariana Grande, of course, but like with this, it's like a total no names, and they're just horrible actors, and the story's horrible. Like
Yeah, that show is horrible.
For overrated, I will put Zoe 101 there because it was formerly my least, and then for underrated, I would probably say the Amanda Show here. I think definitely was a big impact on me. I was a huge Amanda Bynes fan back in the day. A lot of that stemmed from the Amanda Show. And like Mike said earlier, that was the birthplace for Drake and Josh. That's really where they got their name out, and what caused Dan Schneider shows to really evolve from there. From Amanda Show to Drake and Josh, and then to iCarly, and using the same actors, putting them in different roles over the years as well. The whole kind of in-universe crossover, sort of stuff that goes on with Dan Schneider as well. So. All right. Really good discussion there. That's definitely one that I am curious to hear anybody watching this in the comments, what you guys would say for this. We'll definitely talk about it there. All right. We are shifting gears here for our next topic. We have previously so far talked about some great animated shows and some great sitcoms here, but we have not yet tackled dramas yet for this podcast. So we're going to jump into that now. And the first one that we're going to discuss here is a particular subgenre, a particular category that seemingly is everywhere and seemingly inescapable nowadays, that a lot of people love and a lot of people can relate to, while others just cannot stand for the life of them. They just do not understand the appeal whatsoever. Next to police procedurals and cop shows, probably arguably the biggest when it comes to dramas overall, and that is medical shows here. For me personally, I'm just not a big fan of these, so that's why I put medical show sucks here. But you could argue that they are just overrated. They're not like totally trash, but they're just overrated. But looking at this one here, me and Mike both commented on this one during our videos here. But on the opposite end, you have tons of great lists out there from IMDb, from Looper, giving some of the best in these categories as well for people that really, really enjoy them. So, Mike, I want to start with you. What is it about medical shows in particular, this particular style, that you just do not vibe with, that you just do not really
All
understand?
right. So for me, I've actually tried, kind of getting into some medical shows, or just seeing them on TV. There's a couple things that turn me off about them right away. One is the relationships and the love triangles. That's like it seems like it's the main thing. I know in Grey's Anatomy that's huge, like a huge like the love triangles are huge, and it's like all this relationship drama that I don't really care about or am that invested in. And then another thing is, it seems like a lot of them, turn into soap operas, of course, like General Hospital or something of that nature. Um, those are kind of the main reasons for me. Um, it's just not my style of show. I've tried, getting myself to like it and appreciate it, but it's one of the hardest ones for me to get into, and I'm not really a big fan of the genre.
Would you argue that there's a lot more shows in this style that you can respect and you can like understand why they're big, but they're just not really your cup of tea?
Yeah, Grey's Anatomy for sure. That's like the big one for me. That I know is huge with a lot of people, and I can definitely respect it. It's not my show. I don't. It was actually on my show of shows I don't plan on watching ever. And ER, just not my type of shows. But I get why they are popular with people. And another one on here that it was huge, of course, with its finale was MASH. I definitely see why that was one of the most praised and well received shows back in the 70s. So, yeah.
Yeah, all right, fair enough. Matt, I know that you are starting to slowly but surely kind of find your niche in this genre, so why don't you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, so for me, I'm probably going to disagree with both of these guys and say that they're actually pretty good because two main shows in particular that I've been recently getting into are Scrubs and Grey's Anatomy. And I know Scrubs isn't really a drama, so it's obviously way better than a lot of these other shows like ER and stuff, but it's still a pretty fun show as well. And then Grey's Anatomy, like it's not something I could watch every day, but when you're in the right mood to just watch, this kind of dramatic soap opera medical stuff, then it's a pretty fun show to watch. So yeah, that's all I pretty much have to say.
All right, fair enough. So here is my number one reason why I just do not really find these shows that entertaining is simply the hospital setting itself. I don't know about you guys, but whenever I think about hospital or the experiences I've had with the hospital, it's usually not for the best reasons. It's usually because you're going there because someone is sick or you have to get surgery done. It's just not a very entertaining, hospitable, positive environment. You know what I mean? So I just don't think it translates well to a show that's supposed to make you feel good inside because you know that a lot of those characters are going through tragedy, a lot of those characters are going through sad moments, and it just doesn't really work in terms of entertaining you and distracting you from real world events like a standard TV show should do most of the time. So that's my number one reason. But even more so than that, I just find them really repetitive. I just feel like they all look the same. You could show me a screenshot from any of these shows, and I wouldn't be able to tell them apart from one another, because they just all have that same look and feel to one another. But I totally understand for the people that get it, like these are just very familiar shows you can latch on to. You don't have to really think about them all that much. They don't have the most serialized stories. This is like comfort food to a lot of people, but for me, it's just not really my bag, 100%. So that's all I got to say on that. So good one there. All right. As we go to our next one here, I don't know if you guys previewed this, but this is definitely going to be the hardest one to talk about, I think, for us because all three of us are massive, massive fans of this next show that we're going to discuss here. Constantly praised for its inclusion on tons of best TV shows of all time lists, best TV dramas, crime drama lists. But as much praise and affection for this show that exists online, I would argue that it's even easier to find a whole swarm of people that do not like it one bit or find it completely overhyped. And that show is Breaking Bad here. It's a very similar Breaking Bad sucks or is overrated for a lot of people here. And there is my evidence. You can find it on forums here, TikTok, YouTube, Reddit. There is just so much out there that says that this show honestly isn't that good here. And I know for you guys, you're definitely going to disagree, but we've all talked, separately about why we love Breaking Bad, right? That's not really, anything a secret to anybody, right? Because it is the biggest show. But what I want to I'm curious about for you guys is something about the show that you can understand why these people feel the way they do, some sort of flaw or something that you, as a super fan of it, do not like that you can understand why people also wouldn't like it. So, Matt, why don't you go first here? What is one thing about Breaking Bad that you're just not really that big on?
Well, for one thing, this is kind of off topic, but another like really big crime show that I binged all the way through that I wasn't huge on was The Sopranos, and I feel like it's fine that anyone can say, after seeing The Sopranos and not really enjoying it, I can say that someone out there is going to see Breaking Bad and not see it in the same light as someone. I think that it might be slowly because maybe like some of the characters aren't that great, like Marie and Ted and stuff. They're kind of annoying and they really get in the way. And if you're not really big on like Jesse or Walter or Mike or someone, then you're just probably not going to like the show. So yeah.
All right, so some of the characters. All right, fair enough. Mike, what about you here?
So for me, I think there's three reasons why someone either is not a fan of the show or thinks it's overrated. So the first thing is they watched, the first few episodes and they don't continue on with the story, and that's kind of where they leave it off. And the first season is good, but the show definitely gets a lot better as you go on. I think almost every Breaking Bad fan would say that. Like I've never heard anyone say the first season is their favorite season. It's always one of those later seasons. Usually 4 or 5 is talked about as the best. So I think people just give up on it too early. Another reason of like what Matt says, the characters. There is a lot of annoying characters on this series that can definitely get on your nerves. For one, Skylar was one for me that took me a while to kind of get used to her. Marie, Ted, um, Lydia, I know is a big one that people don't like as well.
Yeah, for sure.
And then the last reason that I think people don't like Breaking Bad is they get their hopes all the way up that it's going to be their favorite show of all time. They hear it's the best show ever made, it's the best writing you'll ever see, and when it doesn't live up to that expectation, they get mad and they just don't understand. And they get they think it's overrated at that point. They're frustrated that it wasn't what it lived up to be, and yeah. So I think those are the three main reasons.
All right, fair enough. My kind of theory on this is kind of similar to what Matt said, because, like we talked about with the medical shows, for instance, there are certain tropes, there are certain elements that make those shows what they are that, like me and Mike, just do not really find that interesting. I think the same can be applied to crime dramas as a whole. There's definitely always going to be elements that string all of these different shows together. There's always going to be an anti hero. There's always going to be some mixed feelings about these characters that you may or may not want to root for over time because that they're good people and they're just trying to do what's right, but they definitely do some morally questionable things throughout the show. And so, if you're just not a fan of crime dramas, if you think that genre's played out, if you think it's too oversaturated, and you think all those shows are kind of overrated, then naturally Breaking Bad is going to be another one that you just don't really, understand the hype for. And in addition to kind of like what Mike said as well, the expectations, right? I've seen dozens and dozens and dozens of lists for previous projects or previous videos that talk about how magnificent, how terrific Breaking Bad is, and a lot of the fans, even hardcore fans, would argue that there are elements to it that just do not live up to what critics would say. I think there's a big disconnect between how critics view TV and how everyday, Joes like the three of us would view TV as well. And some of those mixed messaging in terms of what they're trying to describe the show as, essentially. If they say it's amazing or they say it's really bad, sometimes it can get lost in translation there. And I think Breaking Bad is an example of that. But just kind of interesting to see just kind of the tides turning with this one over time. I think there's definitely a bigger outpour of people that are just not really into it as much as there once were. So kind of interesting there. I love this guy though. It's kind of covered here, but you can see it says SpongeBob is better than Breaking Bad and The Wire on Reddit, which I just think is fucking hilarious. Because like yeah, you could totally think that, but this one here I also thought was interesting. Better Call Saul is superior to Breaking Bad. You guys have watched Better Call Saul, but you don't think so?
I've seen all Better Call Saul. I don't think so. I know there's people out there that probably like it, but from like what I've heard from most people who are fans of both, they prefer Breaking Bad. I actually haven't really heard anyone personally say that.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's kind of funny, huh? Like, see, but yeah, I love the unpopular opinions subreddit. You just find like all these weird, like, kind of takes like this. It's fantastic. So, all right, that was a good one as well here. So, moving forward to our next topic here, I gotta see, okay, what it is. So for this one here, this is going to be a little bit different because this is not really something that I think a lot of people could relate to, like the ones that we've talked about before. But for a certain group of people, if there was ever a show from your childhood that a ton of people recognize as one of their favorites, that they have tons of nostalgia for, that they just have this outpouring of love for, that again, you just do not understand the hype for whatsoever. You think it's totally overrated. What that show is for you, the most overrated nostalgic show here. This is something that me and Matt both talked about in our videos. For Matt, he said Ed, Ed, and Eddie is for his pick, one of the most overrated. And for me, it's Grounded for Life, I would argue. But you can see here again, we have a couple other examples. I found a forum post basically saying this exact question: what are your most overrated TV shows from your childhood? And the moderator said South Park. So I don't know what kind of childhood he had back in the day, but I thought that was kind of funny. But one of the responses I thought was actually pretty good was Rugrats. Someone said we have a list from the top 10's most overrated. Adventure Time was pretty high on it. And then again, from that BuzzFeed list that we saw at the very beginning, SpongeBob made it as well. A lot of people not big on SpongeBob there. So Matt, why don't you go first here? You could expand on Ed, Edd and Eddy if you wish. Why it's just
Yeah.
not really your show.
So for me, thinking about it today, kind of all day, because Nick kind of gave us a sneak peek at some of these topics that we were going to talk about. Yeah, for me, I did say Ed, Edd and Eddy in my video, and I do still think that that's definitely an overrated one, but I don't think it's as bad as like I don't think it's. I don't know. I just don't have a lot to say about it because I haven't seen that much from it, to be honest. But definitely, people growing up in like the 90s and like the early 2000s, they love that show. They say so much about it. They just say it's so fun and it's so good. And it's like looking back, it's kind of dark. It's kind of, you know, just like some things that haven't really aged well in it that are just kind of disturbing nowadays, and just not a very interesting show. And I don't have any nostalgia for it because I never really watched it as a kid. And obviously I wasn't growing up when the show was, the hot shit. So I don't really know a lot of that. But I can say Adventure Time definitely overrated. As I mentioned before when we were talking about that versus regular show, that's definitely one that people were always talking about back in the day that I just never understood. It was always confusing. I just never understood what was happening in the episodes. And, like, I guess I could see as an adult, if you could kind of understand the philosophy of it, but I just don't see it. But another show I definitely want to bring up is Doug, because I have zero nostalgia for that show. And like lately, watching like cartoons that I've never seen before, I've been really exploring that show, and that is a show that I really want to just do a video on, just rant on it completely because that show is awful, man.
Wow.
Doug has not aged well at all. It's just 90s Nickelodeon with like Rugrats and like Harold and stuff. A lot of people don't really talk about Doug that much, but when they do, they love it. And I just don't understand any of it. I think that show is horrible. And I think it's like one of the worst shows out there. And yeah, definitely that's overrated for
You
sure.
could you
But
could do a top 10 almost on this topic, Matt. That'd be a pretty
yeah, I
interesting
could. I
list. Yeah.
probably will one day. But for me, my number one off the top of my head is probably Adventure Time.
Okay. Fair enough. I will expand going next here for Grounded for Life. If you've never watched it, it is very similar to Malcolm in the Middle in kind of its styling and the kind of format it uses. It's very edgy, like early 2000s. It debuted in 2001, so right after Malcolm in the Middle. And of the two, I just don't think it works that well as a sitcom, honestly. It has just too much edge for its own good, if that makes sense. Like it tries too hard, I think, to be entertaining when in actuality it just does not work. Some of the cast I think is also kind of overplayed in some of their other projects. I know a lot of people love some of the cast members on the show, but I just never really found them to be that entertaining. And above all else, the use of a laugh track, in addition to the use of the uh, flash forwards and kind of the musical elements like Malcolm in the Middle had, they just clash with one another, which I know some people are going to call me out on that because How I Met Your Mother does that same thing, but the writing on How I Met Your Mother is way better than Grounded for Life. So that is my argument there. I've just heard way too many people, for their own good, talk so highly of it, and I just never understood it. So for me, that would be my answer. So, Mike, you've been sitting here kind of simmering, had a little bit of time to think about this. Do you have an answer for what you would call an overrated nostalgic show?
So for me, I was thinking about it, and a lot of the shows that I grew up with or nostalgic for, I don't think are overrated. There really wasn't a show that I saw that I was like, oh, this show is really horrible or it's you know, really bad. But I'm gonna have to piggy off of Matt here and go with Adventure Time. Um, Another one that's just really talked about in the Cartoon Network sphere and is one that I just really never got. I've seen a few episodes, of course, but it was never something that I was like, oh, I need to see this or I want to watch the whole series for it. I always felt regular shows better. I always like Mordecai and Rigby more than Finn and Jake. Um, so for me, I would say Adventure Time.
All right, fair enough.
All right.
Yeah, definitely clear that after this, like, you guys are not Adventure Time people whatsoever.
Any Adventure Time
Talked
fans, they're
about
going to
this.
be
Absolutely
Yeah,
not.
in
yeah.
the comments.
Interesting. We got to do, you two need to do a collab rant on Adventure Time or something, man. That'd be funny to see. All right, going into our next topic here, this will be the eighth one here. And this next one is not so much about a specific type of show or a specific genre, if you will, but rather TV as a whole and the way that we consume it nowadays, the two different sides that wage this war here in terms of how you watch your TV. Are you someone that prefers to watch it a traditional way, in a week to week format, or do you like to binge it here on streaming? This is something that I think a lot of people have had to think about much more recently than it was, like, say, 10 or 15 years ago, since the advent of streaming. But some people now prefer it that way and only watch it if they're able to binge an entire series or an entire season of a series in a very short amount of time there. It just is more convenient for them. For me personally, I would say week to week watching is definitely the way to go. I actually talked about this in a previous podcast, so I won't ramble too much here. But simply put, I think it's more satisfying to watch it that way. I think it gives you a much more steady kind of flow of content. You're not just exhausted by the end of a huge binge and forget a lot of it by the end of it when you're discussing it with people afterwards. I think it's really cool once you watch like a really anticipated episode, go online and talk to other fans throughout the week and see kind of their theories or what they thought of the episode in preparation for the next one to come out. Binging, you just don't really get that same experience there. So that's my take on it. Mike, why don't we jump to you? Which side do you generally prefer? Because I know you
All
do
right.
both as well. So
This one is tough because I actually am on the side of both because I have my reasons for binging and I have my reasons for weekly watching. So when it comes to, of course, older shows or shows that came out that aren't airing anymore, you pretty much have to binge them. I mean, you can watch week to week and, be on a schedule like that, but you want to be able to finish them, as quick as you can and um, be able to move on to other projects. And I feel like, with shows that came out, say for like example, Breaking Bad. I didn't watch Breaking Bad when it aired back in the day. I binged through the series. But shows now that are coming out with new seasons, I do like the week to week watch. But there is a format that is being released mainly by Netflix that makes it very hard to watch week to week, and that is releasing all of the episodes at the same exact time. For example, Squid Game, a very popular show that just came out recently. And there was a ton of spoilers and tons of things on the internet that were floating around that if you were on social media and you probably saw something related to it. So you were, worried or fearful that you were going to be spoiled. So you had to watch the series. You had to binge it in one sitting. Which I feel like for the people who like week to week, it was very frustrating for them that they had to do that. So um, I think for me, I am going to lean towards binging just because is what I've become most accustomed to. But I still love my week to week watches. I still love new seasons coming out. That I can watch week to week and enjoy uh, each episode. And what you said earlier, you can kind of develop or engage with it more. I feel like than if you were to binge an entire season, you're definitely going to remember more from that one episode and remember the details. You for the ones you're binge watching, you might have to go back a few times or watch the clips over again because you might miss something. But I'm gonna go binging, but I love my weekly watching.
yeah. If you want to, what are some of the shows that you're watching right now that are week to week? Because
All
for
right,
me,
so
I'm watching are the Dick Wolf ones, which aren't the most detailed ones, but it's still nice to kind of engage, like you said, after the fact and can have a steady flow. But for you, what are some of the ones currently that you're watching through?
um, so recently